Hello and welcome to the VMware on AWS Cloud party, as we're calling it, brought to you by ActualTech Media. We've been given special access to VMware Cloud on AWS with a big thanks to the VMware user group, to the VMUG folks for providing us this special access. This is a live recording. We might edit it here and there, but this is a live recording of our firsthand experience using VMC on AWS. And I'm excited. I'm David Davis from ActualTech Media. Glad to be joined by Mr. James Green.
Hey everybody, I'm James Green. I am in charge of the content business at ActualTech Media, and I was super pleased that some of the VMware folks that are friends of mine reached out and asked us to take a look at this. So we're going to be running through it today for the first time, and I'm going to drive. And I've invited some of my friends to come and hang out and watch and chat about it as we go. I'm sharing my screen, the action's happening here, and these guys are going to say all the interesting stuff while we go. Trevor?
Sounds great.
Now I'm up next. My name is Trevor Pott. I'm a writer. I'm a sysadmin. This cat is my overlord. That about sums me up.
Thanks for being on, Trevor. And Keith?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Keith Ward. I'm the senior editor and writer here at ActualTech Media. So James Green cracks the whip over my head, and then I crack the whip over Trevor's head. And so we've got a nice relationship that way. My role today here is to basically be Captain Obvious and say nothing that you probably haven't already thought of.
Awesome. Great introduction, guys. So James, where are we going to get started here?
So I've got the VMware Cloud Services portal pulled up here, and in case I didn't mention this, I've got an evaluation guide that VMware has supplied that basically just tells us all the things that we might want to check out and helps us get started even though we know nothing. So I'm going to be following that as we go through here. So I'm looking at the eval guide now, and it basically tells me to start here on the portal. So I've logged in here before and just looked at this screen, but I haven't touched anything. So I imagine that if you were just doing this for the first time, you went and signed up. I don't know if you got to give it a credit card first or whatever. This is what you would see. So terms of use, of course I read all that. There, that's what I'm expecting to see. So come in here and I just see this big button for create SDDC. So I think that's what we're going to do. Create SDDC. It says to pick a region. Now, I would obviously try to place this region somewhere that made sense given my other workloads and my business and stuff. In this case, VMware and VMUG have provided us some AWS resources as well to be used while we're doing this. And I want to put this stuff, the VMware stuff, by the rest of it, which appears to be US West. So
yes, do not put in US East. US East is always overloaded.
Yeah, so for various reasons, I'm going to go US West. We're going to do single host because that's what we've been given access to, but I assume most folks that are using this would probably do multi-host. Stretched cluster. So you can deploy this SDDC across multiple AWS zones for better availability, it looks like. Kind of cool. All right.
So this is deploying onto dedicated physical hosts in AWS, right?
Understanding. Yep. So my understanding at a high level is that VMware has worked with AWS to automate the deployment of physical vSphere hosts in AWS data centers. When I say, hey, I want this, it pulls from a pool of ESX nodes that they've got automated to go and do their bidding in AWS data centers. And then from a networking standpoint, all this stuff sits right next to other AWS stuff. So we'll get into this later in the eval guide, but we can have the VMware stuff that we deploy here interacting with AWS native resources locally, basically. That's my understanding anyway. Okay, so it doesn't look like I have an option here as far as the size. I don't know if that's because they're always like this or if this is what I've been allocated. Somebody else already set this up for me. I don't really know.
Could this be a default for like the 30-day free trial, which is what looks like has been set up?
Yeah, could be. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about is I don't know if there's typically options here or not. Anyway, I don't have any, so I'll keep going. Okay, I'm going to connect this to AWS. How does that work? Why is that already populated?
Probably Chrome, keeping access to your infos.
Huh. That's pretty slick. Huh. Right on. Okay. So I do already have one VPC and multiple subnets. So I guess I have to pick one of these, see if there's any guidance about which one to pick.
And while you do that, I was looking up the two options when it comes to pricing for VMware Cloud on AWS. The first one is to test with a single host SDDC for $5.60 an hour. And the second one is to start production with 4+ hosts. So I'm guessing maybe we've been granted access to a single host with SDDC?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So anybody can go out and do this, it looks like, for $5.60 an hour.
Right on. I guess that sounds cheap, but if you add that up over the course of a month, it's not that cheap.
Right. I mean, the good thing is it includes... Yeah, over the course of a day. The good thing is it says it includes vSphere, vSAN, and NSX. So you get these software licenses.
Depends who's paying, I guess. I mean, $5.60 an hour for a month for me is a lot of money, but $5.60 an hour a month for an organization that may want to put this into production, that's not bad for, being able to have it around and kick the tires for as long as you want.
But they want, I'm sure they want more than just enterprises to be able to utilize this. So let's ask someone like Trevor, is that a price point that, that is something you could swallow, that some of your customers you think would balk at, or is that reasonable?
No, this is definitely aimed at people who want VMware. They want their VMware that is in the cloud to talk to their VMware on premises. And the money is somebody else's problem. And I mean, this is not to say that it is necessarily overpriced, but I mean, look at the size of the hosts that you get here, right? That's 512 gigs of RAM per host. And a production version of this is 4 of these hosts. Take out half of the storage because you're going to run vSAN and you're going to, have to give up half of that for your data protection. But that's still somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 terabytes worth of usable storage. And you can easily run 1.5 terabytes worth of workload, assuming that you're leaving a node's worth of RAM out for failover. So that's a lot. And even when you get into many of the smaller businesses, we're talking about companies that want to put 3 nodes, maybe 4 nodes of 128 gigs of RAM. It's just they're not priced usably, and both Amazon and VMware have to make money here, and you end up with this being then targeted at much larger deployments.
Sure. So the jumping off point, I would agree with you, is it's on the higher end. If you got not a whole lot to put up here, it's going to be tricky to justify this unless you have some special circumstances that force you into it. But
one of the things that needs to be borne in mind is that it also is a slightly different approach to traditional cloud economics. In cloud economics, you pay per workload, and you pay for what's provisioned. This is closer to how service providers provision things, where they would provision you a blob of resources, and you could then carve those resources up however you want. And that makes VMware on AWS much closer to house. For example, vCloud Director-based service provider VMware solutions are built. And it also makes it much better for running 24/7 workloads that have to be up all the time, because you can divvy up all of those resources however you want.
I would have to spend some time running the math on this, but so we've established that like you probably need a bigger set of workloads to make this the right fit. But once you get into the volume of workloads that make this make sense, then I wonder how the pricing looks compared to, say, deploying this on-prem or doing the work to shift all of this stuff into a different model so you can run it natively in AWS or something.
Well, it's going to depend on what you're doing and what you're buying on-prem, because, of course, you can make on-prem very expensive depending on what you choose. It's close to what the cost of buying instances for AWS, like just straight up regular AWS instances are. But again, I have to come back to this is really useful for legacy workloads that can't be made cloud native. If you do have cloud native workloads, then you're generally always better to go with the regular cloud solutions, only because those can be spun up as needed and spun down. So cloud native workloads can be collapsed when they're not in use. And in that case, and pretty much only that case, being billed based on what you provision makes sense versus a lot of the workloads that people have and are still putting into the cloud would make a lot more sense for this VMware on AWS, because they're still the traditional must be up 24/7. They don't burst. They're not cloud native, etc.
Yeah, so I think the stuff we're going to get into later is going to show the real value here, which is that we could have, like you said, XYZ legacy application sitting right next to my Amazon RDS database,
Yes.
sitting right next to my new cloud native apps that I just built. So, all right.
The speed and latency make a huge difference.
So I need to configure a network, which I think it's asking me to just pick whatever subnet range that I want to use. And it's giving me a default here if I don't want to pick one. So I'll just use that. And here we go. Estimated time to completion, 118 minutes. Well, this week I'm going to take a potty break. Okay, so maybe we will break and come back to this, but I want to say that's longer than I was planning on sitting here staring at the screen, but compared to building this yourself or any other option that I've seen for a production vSphere environment, that's pretty fast. Because I mean, my understanding is we're going from 0 to having pulled a host, installed all the stuff to get vSphere up and running, plus then it's running on vSAN, and we're going to have NSX available. So it's already lost like 4 or 5 minutes in the 30 seconds I was talking, so maybe it won't actually take that long. But
one of these days, remind me to introduce you to Terraform.
2 hours is not bad.
Yeah. You could deploy entire labs with Terraform using a single text file.
So that brings up an interesting question. I would love to know what it is that they're using on the back end to make this go. I'll have to ask.
My understanding, which could be wrong, is that this is using VMware's automated deployment tools, which probably means the nodes themselves are just pixie booted. And then when they're done, they're just scrubbed and returned to the pool.
So do you think this is a, I mean, it really is kind of like they've built this service provider network inside of AWS.
Oh, I would disagree with that, because the service provider stuff is vCloud Director based, which is totally different. This is actually much closer to if you were to build a proper data center VMware deployment, done according to all of the white papers, this is actually about what you would get, because you can use VMware automated deployment tools and that sort of thing to deploy on premises, and you can deploy actually a significant number of VMware products that way. But you have to go through the steps to get all of that set up in advance, and it really kind of only makes a difference if you're big enough that you're constantly deploying nodes.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a perfect example of where auto deploy and host profiles and those technologies make perfect sense. I mean,
designed and deployed and tested by the people who actually know how it all works, and that makes the difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're back after sitting here for about 2 hours to let this thing deploy. Everything seems to have successfully, so we're now looking at the SDDC dashboard sort of thing. And looks like the next thing we're going to do is pop open the vCenter server and see what we've got deployed in here. So according to the eval guide, it looks like typically you would have a site-to-site VPN configured, and so you would be accessing the vCenter server like on your network. But since we don't have that set up here, we're going to configure a quick firewall rule so that we can access it without that. So this will be our first peek at what's other stuff. I need to find a network tab.
Maybe if you click on the ATM SDDC.
Aha, you are a genius. Okay. Add a firewall rule. Successfully added. Very nice. Okay. Well, it looks like I can get the address from the settings tab here. So it's kind of dynamically made me a URL here that I can probably bookmark.
Wow, look at that.
Ta-da! Yeah, vCenter. And I got to say, I know we were talking about the deployment timeline earlier and how you could automate some of this, and yeah, but let's just compare it to the standard enterprise. The reality is they're probably going to go build this by hand. Most, maybe service providers have scripted this, some integrators have scripted this, but most people are going to go deploy it on their own. I have done this a lot of times, and I sure couldn't do it in 2 hours. So, for a lot of enterprises, that's still a totally reasonable amount of time in my mind.
Could basically edit the whole conversation and just go, insert pets versus cattle debate here.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Because the reality is most enterprises are still full of pets. So I'm grabbing credentials for Open vCenter. What does that do?
So here's a general question that I thought of when I saw the original UI there. It said an 83 gigahertz processor is what it set us up with.
No,
here.
that's 83 gigahertz of total CPUs. So it has some number of cores, I think 32, and so it's 32 times whatever the speed of the CPUs are.
So that's what I was going to ask. I would think for admins, the cores might be actually a more relevant number in terms of helping them grasp what kind of power they have.
Yeah, and what kind of cores would help too, because 1 gigahertz of a 5-year-old CPU is not the same as 1 gigahertz of a modern CPU. I was also myself thinking just how utterly useless it is to do this. But the flip side of that is that this is how every cloud platform classifies their CPU capability. It's pointless, and it tells you nothing.
It is helpful in getting a big picture perspective of the scope of the pool of resources available, but yeah, I think it's hard for an admin to think this way. Because
but I mean, it also has real world implications. This is beyond just a nice way to think about things. a good example of this would be Oracle licensing. You know, when considering how much Oracle licensing costs per core, you would want to make sure that you give it the best cores that you have. And, you know, Oracle also tends to have this whole, you have to pay for all the stuff that you could theoretically use. So, you know, for certain vendors, the details matter. And while this might be somewhat useful as a really high level overview, it's, yeah, I don't know.
Does it give you any more details? Like, can you drill down and get details on the, you know, on the cores?
I would assume that somewhere in here you can, but then of course, once we get into vCenter, you'll be able to. So we can go look here and see what it actually is. We have
36 times 2, that's where they're getting the 80, whatever. Huh.
And then I suppose there's hyper-threading involved here.
Sure.
Okay, something connecting your AWS account. I thought we did that during the deployment, so I'm a little confused about what this means, but it says select your SDDC name, click connect to AWS account. Maybe it is because we already did it that I don't see anything here. See, okay, yeah, so it's already connected. I assume that means I don't need to do anything else.
So that's the configuration there for the direct connect to AWS, right? Can you expand that out a little bit, the virtual interfaces?
It asked me about this, you know, we're asking for the deployment of the SDDC.
Okay.
I don't see anything else in there, though.
That's a new acronym for me there, the DCLI, the Data Center Command Line Interface. Some sort of CLI bundle you can download to administer this thing?
Looks like it. AWS CLI for VMware Cloud on AWS, I guess. I don't know. I'm still looking for this connect to AWS account thing because...
You already connected it.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm going to skip it. I'm going to assume it's already done. Okay, so yeah, we did all this. Sweet. So now we're going to put it next to something natively in AWS, I think. What does ENI stand for? Anybody know? Enable inbound ENI. Well, while somebody looks that up, we're going to configure it with more firewall rules. So these firewall rules are going to enable us to talk between
Elastic network interfaces.
Oh, okay, got it.
Kind of what I thought.
So basically, we're going to create the rules that allow our newly provisioned SDDC to talk to stuff in our AWS VPC. Yeah. So, okay. So important distinction I just noticed. There is management gateway and then compute gateway, which are separate. So I'm going to want our workloads to talk to AWS stuff. So I'm going to make this in the compute gateway section. Firewall rules, add rule.
I do like the HTML5 interface. I mean, it's much better than the old vSphere web client.
It all looks very nice.
Yes.
So this is handy. Instead of having to specify this stuff, because we're connected to the VPC, it can do this dynamically. So we're just going to say, let it talk to Amazon. The eval guide has an address range here I'm not sure about, but I'm just going to follow the guide and we'll see what happens. I don't know why that.
Should that not be your address range that's inside your VPC, which is 172.17.0.0/24?
I'm actually thinking it should be the 10 dot something that's provisioned in the inside the SDDC here, because I selected the default. Hang on, I'm looking back.
What are we trying to accomplish here again?
So we're creating a firewall rule that's going to allow.
From the Amazon VPC to your destination. So then that would be whatever the IP range is inside your VMware on AWS setup.
Which I thought I created.
10.2.0.0.16.
Yeah, that.
Right, right.
Are you seeing that somewhere, or do you just remember that? Oh, here it is.
It says appliance
right
subnet and infrastructure subnet.
So that seems to me to be what we would want to put here.
Okay. That does make some sense, yeah.
Okay. This is going to be any. Okay. And now the other direction. And then I think we should be able to talk back and forth between our SDDC and AWS. Wow. So this will be inside. This will be AWS. Any. Save. Okay. Okay, now we're going to configure the same sort of stuff on the AWS side. Makes sense. So we're going to create a security group to do that. VMware was kind enough to pre-populate some things for me to make this easier, so I'm just going to make sure I'm not duplicating effort here.
I think whatever it was pre-populated with, it is no longer pre-populated with that.
Oh, maybe because I didn't name it?
No, I think because you replaced the item as opposed to adding.
Right. So
you,
add
yes.
back whatever I just destroyed. All.
Now we're just getting a sense of what it's really like to be an admin, right? This stuff happens all the time.
You're right.
You have to learn the interface. You have to learn the processes and procedures.
One hopes a lot of them are less clueless than me. Okay. So now we've got rules on this security group that say we can get traffic in from our SDDC subnet and send traffic out to our SDDC subnet.
We're going to add some cool background music to make all this admin stuff look really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll speed it up when it's boring, which is usually. Okay. We're also going to let EC2 talk to S3, looks like.
So James, translate that for those who are less used to this, to the cloud and all of that. When you say EC2 talking to S3,
so
what are you saying exactly?
What we're going to do is create a rule that lets the compute resources that we were just messing with their networking also talk to Amazon S3 storage, which is a separate service, and by default they can't talk back and forth because they're not going to make that assumption for you. So
right.
You want EC2, which is compute instances, to be able to talk to S3 buckets, which is object storage. We have to enable that.
Sure.
That answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's my editor's training coming in, making sure it's clear for those who are, who are not as familiar.
Okay, endpoints.
Do we also need to let S3 talk to Amazon VMware Cloud on AWS?
Probably, maybe, which may come next. I don't know. Let's see.
Or maybe once we connect S3 to our VPC,
I don't
then
know. Is VMware Cloud on AWS talking to S3? I mean, my understanding is that these things have local storage. There would be
is what?
There would be little point in having vSAN if you didn't have some form of local storage.
Yeah, I'm sure it has local storage. I see this as really optional. I guess if you had an application running in VMC that needed an S3 bucket.
Oh yeah, I could totally see applications running in your S3 that want to read and write from S3 buckets. Yeah. Okay, S3. Right there.
So as James is going through this, let me ask a question to those of you who have done this a lot more than me. How intuitive does this process feel, and how just compared to other systems you've used, and how clear is it what you should be doing from place to place?
That depends on what system you grew up with.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really interesting about this too, is we're really marrying two worlds that have history in a lot of ways.
VMware admins don't tend to find AWS all that user-friendly and vice versa. I mean, there are, of course, a number of admins that have learned both interfaces, but clouds in general require a different way of thinking about resources and thinking about networking and all the rest of it than does on-premises stuff. A good example of this is the AWS Application Firewall is a completely different way of going about it than the traditionally port and IP address-based firewalls you might find for something like IP tables.
Yeah, configuring the VMware Cloud on AWS seems pretty intuitive. I mean, the interface is nice, and then they dump you into vCenter. But all this configuration in AWS is not very friendly, I wouldn't think, for most VMware admins. But I guess it's only if you really need that direct connection to AWS, right? It's not required. I mean, it's one of the huge benefits of having VMC. But it's
I was
not
about to say, if you didn't need it, why would you be using VMware on AWS?
I guess just to get rid of your local data center. Pay a lot doing it, though. Pay a lot to accomplish.
Yeah, there are cheaper ways. For example, the VMware vCloud Director-based partners.
Right.
Okay, so while you guys were talking, what I have done is I have subscribed to a content library. So if you're not familiar, content library is a way for you to store templates and things that are going to be reusable in vSphere. And there is a way to publish those so that someone can subscribe to it. I think usually that's probably used inter-organizationally, meaning like if you're a global organization, you may have your office in another region subscribed to your content library back in the home office or something. But so in this case, I've just added a subscription type content library that VMware has provided for the purposes of the evaluation. And basically that's just going to give us some templates that we can start deploying in here without having to go through and build all this stuff ourselves. So,
and for everybody else, content library means marketplace. I don't see that it's taking time here. Oh, sync library, it's synchronizing.
Seems to be going.
Well, you can deploy a few things because they seem to be synchronizing in sequence.
Yeah, so I'm just going to grab something easy, I guess.
Try to grab something with a size greater than 0.
So it asks us to deploy a Server 2012 VM, which naturally...
But that has a size of 0.
While we wait... Uh-oh. No can do. That's not good.
Intriguing.
Okay, so
It wouldn't let you put it on that host?
it is forcing me to deploy into a resource pool, it looks like. So I can't deploy directly to the host itself. And like my usual process would be, okay, I'm going to assume that DRS is enabled, and I'm going to choose the cluster and let DRS make a wise placement decision.
There's only one host, so we don't have DRS.
You know what? That is a great point, David Davis. This is why you're a V expert.
But it's a one-node cluster.
No DRS. Wow. Okay, we're going to try it.
Saying this because one-node cluster hurts my soul.
I've never seen this, though, locked down in such a way that you can only deploy into the resource pool. That's kind of interesting.
Hey, I'm sure there are going to be some lockdowns because they're supporting this.
Thou shalt administer things properly.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the nice things about using this is it kind of offloads the burden of, knowledge and expertise to VMware, which traditionally we've had to manage ourselves.
Yeah, they're supporting it. They're doing all the upgrades. That's nice.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind not having to deal with upgrades. Oh, I don't have to deal with upgrades. If I were an admin, I wouldn't mind not having to deal with upgrades. It's interesting trying to walk through this using the eval guide because I feel like I'm almost less sure-footed because I'm trying to depend on the eval guide than if I were just in here poking around myself. Like I feel like I would be having a better go at it if I were just poking around using my brain instead of reading this eval guide.
Well, yes. I mean, if I were poking at it myself, it would probably take 4 times longer, but I'd know what I was doing when I was done.
Right. I mean, this is helpful because it shows me features that I might not have found on my own or something. But on the other hand, I don't know how much of it I'm going to remember. Okay, so we're waiting for this content library to sync so I can deploy this Server 2012 R2 VM.
Wasn't the promise of the cloud something, everything was fast and instantly available?
That's right. What is this? Oh, hey. All you had to do was speak. Look at that. All right, let's deploy one.
Wasn't that something they demonstrated at VMworld Europe last year? Some Alexa function to migrate a VM in the cloud or?
Oh yeah, no, they've got Alexa functions tied into all sorts of stuff now. Some of the vExperts were talking about it. Yeah, there are, I think, some flings that you can add that add even more Alexa capabilities.
That doesn't sound like a recipe for disaster.
You ask me, any of those digital assistants are entirely a recipe for disaster, but that's a whole other story. I'm just going to wait for the news stories to come and about how everybody got robbed because of their digital assistant.
Yeah, I mean, Alexa managing my data center doesn't sound that awful, but if I think about saying, hey Siri, go upgrade my firmware.
Yeah, you're talking to someone who still refuses to use mobile banking apps because I can't put 1 trillion layers of defense between me and the internet.
For what it's worth, she said she can't upgrade my firmware, so it's a non-issue. Okay, while this is deploying, which I see that it is, we're also going to go deploy an EC2 instance on the other side, presumably.
Deployed.
So talk back and forth. So let's get that going. They can race. I know which one I think will win, given that we're deploying a T2 Micro versus, that's probably Amazon Linux or something versus, no, we are going to deploy Windows on this side too. Probably an assumption that a lot of these vSphere admins also are Microsoft Server admins, which probably wouldn't be an unreasonable assumption.
Administering vSphere is something you do as a career. Administering Windows is something you do as a punishment.
Trevor, you write exactly the same way you speak. Do you know that? That's why your copy is so entertaining. Yeah.
Insert poop emoji here.
So I don't remember if I picked one of these subnets specifically to connect.
Use .1 because that's the one that in the management interface actually says that some IPs are consumed. See, 232 IP addresses available. Something's in IPs.
Seems more likely to work, so we'll go with that. Enable, it says. I don't know why we need to give it a public IP if it's going to be talking across our internal to Amazon networks between our VPC and our SDDC. So many
It's still got to hit a firewall somewhere. If it wants to talk to anything, be it your internal or directly to the internet, it's got to go to a firewall. That's probably why.
Yeah. All right.
So this will assign it whatever firewall it happens to have.
So this will be that rule I configured earlier, or the security group, I should say, that lets them talk back and forth. And go. Oh, right. Let's hope I can find that key. All right.
We launched some instances in AWS.
So here's an instance we are currently launching. Here's one I already launched the other day. Maybe I should delete that. And then I was just going to check back in on our vSphere VM. We have finished deploying, so I'm going to fire it up. Why not fire up this Linux server too?
Welcome to 2012.
Ta-da!
Sorry. 2016, it's only 4 years away. And boy, won't that be fun?
So now we're going to test some sort of communication between these VMs.
Log in and ping them back and forth or something.
Okay.
Once they're
Is that in the guide?
Once they're on. The guide suggests that I go let myself RDP to this VM here. So security group. I don't know if there's a fast way for this.
There's RDP at the bottom.
That's what I was looking for. Don't tell anybody about this.
You're literally putting it on a live broadcast.
Shoot. That wasn't well thought out. Okay. This guy's up.
I believe that officially gets you 40 lashes with a wet noodle.
39. So I am RDP'd into the server that we have deployed on the AWS side. And I presume that I'm going to try and ping that one from the other one.
Hey, at this point, I'll give you a cookie if the darn thing doesn't have a stroke.
If this works, I'm going to be surprised. I'm just going to look. 1.9. Stop it. Yeah.
Shocking. Shocking.
Shocker.
Timed out.
So here's the good news about this not working. According to the eval guide, it just works like it's supposed to. But in the real world, you have done something wrong. So now we're going to figure out what we have done wrong. So my first question is, what is the address of this guy? That is on the 172.17.1 network, which is one of 3 subnets in our...
Which is the one I told you to open.
What's that? Yeah, this is the one you told me to put it on, so that's a good start. The first thing I'm going to do, I guess, is check those security groups.
I heard they have real-time chat support with engineers built into the interface.
Really? Should we try and figure it out?
Just keep that in mind in case you can't figure it out.
Actions? Upper right-hand corner. Down, right there.
We can always
guess not.
Probably fix our problem. All right. Well, let's.
Hey, I think deleting the data center solves a lot of problems. Personally,
let's do what I would prefer to do if I was on the support side, and at least try. First.
Mind you, I work with composable infrastructure, so deleting the entire data center legitimately is an answer to almost every question.
So yeah, and just build a new one.
Yeah.
So the first question I will ask is the VM we spun up on the SDDC side actually getting a 10.2. something IP address, which it is not. So no wonder it doesn't work. It's on a host on the 10.2 address. Nobody's doing DHCP for that network, I guess.
No, something has to be doing DHCP or it wouldn't have an IP. I would guess that you have a host or you have a firewall somewhere doing NAT that lives in 10.2, and behind that is whatever this network is. Pull up the networking for that host.
Oh, you know what? Now,
somewhere there's a virtual router that is natting.
Remember how in the eval guide it wanted us to put something else here and I refused? Listen to the eval guide. It's actually supposed to be this because of exactly what you just said. No bueno.
You do realize that you just told it to accept 192.168.00. Oh no, you did /16 or /24?
/16.
16.
Okay, fair enough.
I fixed the groups appropriately, but I bet there's something else I didn't fix yet. But I feel good about those rules.
Well, okay, so here's a question. If the router is on 10.2, then you just allowed what's behind the router, but the router still can't talk to it. So you'd still have to have the 10.2. No?
I'm wondering about
whether or not that's the router.
This security group thing. 842, that's itself. So I guess that's anything within this group can talk to each other. So that's fine. Anything within this zone can talk to each other.
Are there some screenshots in the eval guide that you can, kind of compare to what you see on the screen there?
I will just go and look and see if there's anything I skipped that would be breaking this.
Speaking of which, James, how do you find the eval guide? Is it pretty clear and straightforward when you're going through it?
Yeah, it is, I think. Yeah, I haven't had any trouble, I don't think, following the steps, except for, obviously, I've missed something here, but I've also been trying to talk. And, yeah, if I were sitting here doing this by myself, I feel like it would be pretty easy to use. By the time we make it to the end of this, basically, we're going to have spun up stuff on both sides and then made sure they can talk to each other. And then we're going to let some VMware stuff talk to some native AWS stuff like S3. Well, we're already doing that, actually. vCenter is pulling from a content library that lives in S3. No, that was public, though, so we haven't really done that. At any rate, the scope of the eval, I think, is reasonable.
Okay.
Found something I missed earlier. I had said I didn't understand this part about connecting your AWS account, and I was looking for the button for where to connect the AWS account. It says, if you linked to AWS during deployment, you may skip this section, which we did, so that's why I couldn't find it. I just missed that little bit there. Okay, so.
The TLDR on this entire process at the moment is VMware and Amazon really could make everybody's life easier by creating a wizard with common deployment scenarios that goes something along the lines of, you have a VMware on AWS cluster here, and you have an AWS VPC over here. Would you like to connect them? Check the boxes for the things that need to talk to each other and push go.
I would expect that something like that may be in the works. I don't know, but
It'll be a little animated paperclip that does that, Trevor.
But I mean, like you said, it would be logical. So
After the only useful
It looks
one,
like you're trying to build a cluster.
after the only useful thing to get out of Redmond, you'd expect that it would be hired somewhere.
So I found another section where we chose to think we were smarter than the eval guide and put in our own networks. And in fact, the eval guide was supplying the networks that are on the far side of that router. And I should have put not the management. So I think the catch was we were using the management network that probably vCenter and the ESX hosts and stuff live on, because that's the one we had seen, but there's a separate network for the workloads, and that's what it was telling me to put in. So fixed. And it's pinging!
All right.
Right. So recap. Right now we have a Windows instance that I'm on right here that we deployed in EC2, and it is pinging a Windows instance that we deployed in the VMware SDDC. And basically, all we had to do was create some firewall rules correctly, shocker, and they can talk back and forth. So to put this into perspective for somebody who may be deploying this in the real world, later on, we will get to, well, we may not because we don't have the stuff to set it up right, but the end here probably for a lot of people is that you will migrate workloads from your on-prem vSphere deployment up to this vSphere SDDC deployment. So those workloads will run here, or perhaps still live on-prem, and you'll have a site-to-site VPN set up with Amazon. And then workloads in either of your vSphere locations can communicate with things you're building in AWS pretty easily. So pretty slick. All right, now I'm going to skip back ahead and see what's next. I presume we're going to have the stuff here in the VMware SDDC talk to some other AWS resources. That would be my guess. And that is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to allow this VM here to, or something, to talk to RDS. So looks like they have supplied us with a virtual machine that's already set up to do this for us. So it's in the content library here. It's this one. What do you think, Keith, as the, looking at Trevor's sticker, Keith, as the person with probably the least stick time over the last 5 years working on VMware stuff, let's say that you were dropped into an environment now and you had to start poking at some of this stuff. Do you have any comments about the interface or about what you see me doing that would be insightful?
No.
In other words, let me just put you on the spot for a minute.
Yeah. Well, I'm just sitting here looking over it, and when we're talking about it, I understand what's happening and where this is sort of going. It's been a while since I've messed around with IP addresses and VPCs and things like that. So I would certainly need to upgrade my knowledge in that area. In fact, there are efforts underway in that regard, but yeah, I think this is a very clean UI for the most part, and everything seems really logically laid out. And as you say, going through the book, going through the guide there, if we were taking our time step by step, it would take us through it, and then we can kind of play around with it. So for someone at my level of knowledge, I think this all adds up to it's a pretty easy way to do it. It's and shouldn't cause veteran admins all that many headaches, not all that much heartburn. Would you agree with something like that, Trevor? From an admin perspective?
Yeah, you know, what I would say is expect that this is going to take you a day to learn, deploy a test system, and then destroy it. And then probably the next day, you'll be ready to start working on production stuff. But this is definitely not one of those you're just going to roll up to the interface, click a few buttons, and go. You need to give yourself a day to master it. It is a whole new infrastructure.
But yeah, I think if you are well versed in the underlying technology and you've been working with this for a few years, to get yourself from there to knowing how to use this is just a matter of becoming familiar with the interface and understanding logically how it's all built. So yeah, I agree with you, Trevor. I think spend a day poking at it and then get to doing what you actually need to do. And
I would strongly recommend anybody who's considering doing this, watch a couple of videos online about AWS basics, especially anything that focuses on AWS networking, because that's really going to be the stuff that throws you, is firewalls, networking, that sort of thing. And once you get how AWS represents familiar concepts, you're usually good.
Yeah, I think like I was saying earlier, one of the tricks is marrying your nomenclature and understanding between the vSphere world you know and the AWS world you may or may not. And depending on which one
keep a notepad handy, because anytime you see something that looks like a GUID, copy what it's supposed to relate to.
So you're talking about like making a chart that says such and such a VM actually has such and such an instance ID?
More like, you know how you were in your firewall rules, you had a communication with something that had a GUID. It would be really useful to know what that something was and to keep track of it.
Yes. Is the security group that allows anything in it to talk back and forth with my VMware SDDC.
Mm-hmm. But you don't have that information in that UI element. All you see is something with a GUID, right? So you don't really know that that GUID is a group ID and what a group ID is and what might be contained in it. So keeping a little notepad of everything that is this GUID, it can help you sort through a lot of Amazon, at least until you get really familiar with how they do things.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Just a little table that helps you know what's what, because what's tricky is you're either going to end up with 19 tabs open or you're going to end up going back and forth a lot, because since everything's in its own console, you can be here and look at this security group ID, but then when you're over somewhere else, you know, in the VPC trying to configure something over here, you don't have access to that information. So yeah, keeping a table like Trevor's talking about to shortcut that will save you some time and heartburn, I think. All right, so while we chatted, this test VM has deployed. So I'm going to move on. I think that we need to spin up an RDS instance for it to talk to. So yep, I'm going to pop over to Amazon, and we're going to go to RDS. And MySQL, picking some settings here to make it deploy a small little MySQL instance that we can use for testing.
So in the guide, James, referencing what Trevor said earlier about if you have this situation, you might want to use this. Are there sort of recommendations in the guide for what you're doing right now? If you want to add, RDS sizing and things like that, are there any sort of examples that they throw in there to help you understand what you might want?
Yes, actually. If you've ever used in what they call evaluation guide before, you may be familiar with this, but they're very verbose. It tells you exactly what to do, and the objective there is to set you up for success. So because you're not familiar with what you're evaluating, it very explicitly, I mean, it told me pick this instance size, pick this, storage, whatever. I could pick something else and it would work fine, but
Right.
the guide very explicitly tells me what to do so that I'm not stuck here scratching my head. And the only hang up we've had so far was because I ignored the guide, and if I had done exactly what the guide said to do, it would have worked the first time. So yeah, I find it, I mean, Keith, with not much hands-on experience recently because you're focusing on writing, you could sit down and follow this guide. I mean, you could step-by-step walk through this and you would have it right. So
I'm a proponent of RTFM, yes. Because for me, for someone who hasn't had hands-on recently, being able to set stuff up and not really know what I'm doing at least gives me things I can play with then. I can get in there and I can fool around and get beyond I can't even get the firewall rules set properly, so I'm going to give up. I mean, if I can create stuff, even doing the step-by-step, then I can play around and break stuff and, have things that I can learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. So of note, I need to know for this particular step which availability zone this SDDC was deployed in. So I don't remember if I specified that. I think I just picked a region, but maybe I did specify it. Either way, I needed to find that just now. And while I was in here working on the network or whatever, I didn't really see it. I was looking at this here, but US West is the region. To find the availability zone, I went back out here, and you can see on this tile, this is the availability zone. So
2A? Does 2A represent the availability zone?
So this portion here is the region, and then each has multiple availability zones, and they're numbered like this. So
yeah.
In this case, my SDDC is deployed in 2A. And so availability zone, I'm not an AWS expert, but my understanding is an availability zone is basically a data center campus, at least. So you're somewhere like in that data center or that data center, those are availability zones. Those availability zones are in a region, so US West is in Oregon or whatever. That's how it breaks down, at least that's my understanding.
Well,
Right.
it's whatever the physical layout is, the availability zones mean that Amazon is not going to attempt maintenance on more than one availability zone at a time. So whether or not you have multiple availability zones per physical data center, it's more about the maintenance windows and stuff like that.
Choose existing, and this is exactly where Trevor's table would come in handy. Because I only have the one, I just happen to know, because it's not that complicated, that default is the one I want. But if you had 20, because you're already using AWS for other things, you would really want to know which security group to pick here, and that table would come in handy. So right now I'm just specifying some options here that the eval guide specifies, and the reason these are specific is because this VM that I deployed over here for testing purposes, it's going to be already pre-configured with these same values. So if I configure it like this, it should make our test work, I hope.
Now, VMware Hands-On Labs, they have a lab on VMware Cloud on AWS. So if anybody's watching this and they want to, get some experience without paying $5.60 an hour, they can do it for free over at the Hands-On Labs. I don't know that it's the exact same lab we're doing now, but it is free and it is out there.
So is it a good general practice then to have your mission critical data in availability zones in different regions then in terms of DR and
If you're doing your
protection and all
backups
that?
and stuff like that, always put your backups into a different region, yes.
Yeah, and ideally your application would be architected so that there were nodes of the application in different availability zones. So Amazon decides to take one out, or one gets hit by a speeding bus, your application is, perhaps degraded, but still online because.
Yes, if you have like a fully cloud native application that can do that sort of thing, then absolutely do it that way. If you are, running some legacy stuff like, say, Windows applications, then you would toss those into a single region and then do your backups or something like that.
Yeah, and there's, replication technology and stuff like that. Same principle applies. You want to replicate to at least a different AZ, maybe a different region.
No, see, an availability group would never be good enough for an actual proper backup design for the whole Hurricane Sandy problem. Even if let's say that copying between availability groups, it might protect you from some administrator tanking the S3 storage on your availability group, but the first hurricane that happens along is going to wipe out your whole region.
Back to what we were saying earlier about the physical layout, you should assume that availability zones are in the same metro area. So they may or may not be on campus, but they're at least like metro distance from each other. So they would be susceptible to the same natural disaster. Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to get logged into this VM, assuming that we're going to use it.
Go ahead, Brian.
And the VMware has just preloaded a little application here for us that we're going to use to test this. So this is kind of like the initialization page for this app. And so once the database is available, we're going to try and initialize this application using the database we've just provisioned for it. It's hopefully almost ready. So we are going to need the endpoint address. Hey, it's available. Maybe it's there now. I'm going to assume that's what we need. So we're going to, yeah, that's what it's showing in the screenshot in the guide here. So we're going to go over to this application here. If this works, I'll be amazed.
The interesting thing I learned about VMC is that you can, of course, you could run whatever virtual machines you want, but if they are sort of management, infrastructure, type tools like backup, data protection, DR, things like that, they all have to be approved because it's a supported environment, by VMware.
Sure.
So you can't just run whatever backup tool you're using right now. You have to use an approved backup or replication tool or whatever it might be.
Interesting. Is there a easy to access list of those things?
That's a good question. Let me look that up.
And it would be good for somebody to just be able to know at a glance, can I run this software or not?
Security groups. RDS Launch Wizard. That's not the right security group.
Where do you see this?
Right by your mouse. Down, down, down. Over to the right. Wow, slow down. Up. Up.
This
right there. You're in the wrong security group.
Is not the correct security group.
James, to answer your question about compatible tools with VMware Cloud on AWS, it's in the VMware Compatibility Guide, as I should have guessed. So if you go there, you can look up VMware Cloud on AWS, and then the different partners that have solutions that are available. For example, Actifio, Commvault, Druva, Dell, NetApp, Rubrik, Veeam, and Veritas are the only ones that I see listed right now.
Okay, so it's currently a short list of well-known suppliers of data center technology. Okay, good spot, Trevor. That's why we invited you. So now I'm going to try again, and hopefully it works. I don't know how that happens. Some combination of things I'm pressing causes the system tray thing to open.
That's the Lando Calrissian, it's not my fault defense, James.
All right. Hey, big money.
Hey, it's a TARP.
VMC, super secure.
It's an open source photo sharing app. So you connected its database to RDS.
Correct. So no.
No?
I created the application instance using that RDS database I created as a backend. So the database lives in RDS. The instance, the compute portion of this application is running in a VM in my VMware SDDC.
Oh, nice.
Just kind of backwards, but that's okay. The database is the thing you want to run 24/7, so put it on the infrastructure optimized for that.
I would imagine there's a lot of people running RDS 24/7. All right, last thing we're going to do today, I think, and then I know you guys got to run, and after this, I think it is connecting up to your on-prem stuff and doing some migrations and hybrid linked mode, and unfortunately, all of our networks are fighting against that, so we're not going to be able to do that today. But we are going to use an AWS load balancer, an ELB, to load balance probably some instances in our VMware SDDC. That's pretty cool, actually. Okay, so let's get this going. We are going to go deploy Apache instance here that will be the things that we're going to load balance across. I assume we'll deploy more than one. That'll probably be helpful. So they gave us some Apache servers here. So we're going to deploy 4 of these. And we're going to probably yank some of those out of service and move them around and such to illustrate the, or maybe we'll just refresh a few times and a different web page will load to illustrate that we're actually using the load balancer. Okay, so I have created the ELB, created a target group, which is where you put the various nodes that will participate in the load balancing here, and now I have proceeded to add all of those nodes to the list here to be registered. And there we go, they're registered. So now that we have the target group, I said I created the load balancer, I guess that was a lot. I created the target group. I'm now going to go and create the load balancer that will direct traffic at this target group.
So the target group is a set of instances in AWS, and the load balancer is in AWS too, right?
Target group is this set of VMs.
Oh, the VMs, the front-end VMs.
Yep. So
got it.
This is the web app or whatever back here, and we're creating a load balancer on the AWS side to load balance across our vSphere VMs. So it doesn't say, but I'm going to pick HTTP since that's what we're doing here.
So compared to running it,
HTTPS.
Oh, wait a minute. It said application load balancer. Okay, yeah. Yeah, but everything's configured using port 80, so sorry.
So let me ask what's probably a really dumb, obvious question, but it's in my mind now. All the hard stuff we're seeing, as far as I can tell, is done on AWS, and not really in VMware, other than the underlying hypervisor, as far as I can tell, being ESX. So what is the big value you get out of VMware through this entire system? Am I thinking about this wrong? But it just seems like so much of this could be done without bringing VMware into the equation, and I'm not sure.
I don't know about that. So there are a couple of things that are, I won't say wrong, but just inadequately informed because we haven't gotten there yet. So you've stated that a lot of the hard stuff, or all of the hard stuff that we're doing, is in AWS. Well, this is because so far all the networking and firewalls that we've played with are in AWS. If we were to start getting into NSX and start trying to do interesting NSX stuff across multiple sites, that would seem hard. It's keeping track of firewalls rules and how networking is being applied that gets most people into trouble, and that is usually because they don't have a nice cheat sheet somewhere of what all the things mean, and also because Amazon might do things in ways that are different than what you're used to. An on-premises administrator probably, for example, is not using security groups for different workloads and assigning firewalls based on security groups. I mean, some might, but you'll still see a lot of people doing this by IP address or by subnet and stuff like that. Amazon is doing it the way it should be done, but it is perhaps.
So are you sort of
so many admins do not do it this way?
Right. Are you sort of implying here, and you may not be, and that's why I'm asking, that then so much of the benefit you get from VMware is simply because they're the ones who are responsible for NSX? I mean, is NSX really the main?
Well, NSX is definitely a big value add here, because NSX will make bringing your on-premises network and joining it up to the VMware on AWS network easier. But I should point out that you do not need NSX to make this stuff work. NSX just makes it work better. What VMware is really bringing to the table is known quantities. Now, one of the things that I'd really like to point out when we're talking about why is VMware valuable, it has to do with regulation, certification, and support. So a great example of this is VMware, for example. They support Oracle running in a VM on top of their virtualization stack. Now, they do this by hiring Oracle experts and providing you that full support from VMware itself. And this is something that smaller virtualization providers and open source virtualization providers generally don't do. So if you wanted to get official Oracle support and you were running this on unnamed virtualization provider, well, Oracle might not play nice with you. Now, in this case, Oracle and Amazon do have a bit of a frenemy relationship going on, but Oracle is just one example. VMware is used to support innumerable enterprise and industry-specific applications where, quite frankly, VMware is the only platform that's supported for them. And you might see support for Amazon, you might see support for some of the other platforms come in time, but in many cases, it can take independent software vendors a decade or more to add that support, and only if there's sufficient demand.
I have a couple more thoughts. So your comment was essentially, it looks like all the hard stuff we're doing here is in AWS, and nothing's really happening on the VMware side. So what's VMware doing here? Part of the reason that it appears that way while we're doing the eval is because VMware provided us a bunch of stuff pre-configured via the content library. And so, the entire build of the VMware SDDC was automated. That's what we had to pause to wait 2 hours for it to happen. So VMware did all that magic on the back end. That was hard, and we weren't there for that. And then they provided a bunch of stuff for us, which they have not done on the AWS side because they couldn't really. They could have, say, provided, a cloud formation template that built all this, but at that point, it almost would have been so easy that I didn't get any value out of doing this because I didn't experience it. That almost would have made it too easy.
Right. No such thing.
This could have, this demo eval thing could have just as easily gone the other way, where everything was built in Amazon already for us, and then they said, go do this on the VMware side and then make them talk. And then your observation would have just been reversed. So I think there's very complicated stuff happening on both sides, and it just so happens to be that we're doing some of the building in AWS. The one place true is we're using other non-infrastructure as a service AWS resources. And so that's why in the eval, we're building on that side. We deployed RDS database, for example.
I think it's important to note, though, that eval or not, one of the big advantages that VMware brings to the table, and one of the reasons why you would choose VMware on AWS versus an on-premises solution, is that VMware has hand-waved away so much of this. That's one of the big value adds that's being brought to the table here. I mean, setting up all of this infrastructure on Amazon would, if you were to just use Amazon native instances, would be fairly simple. But to Keith's question, why would you choose VMware on AWS over Amazon? Well, because of the enterprise legacy that comes with it. VMware had to put a lot of time and effort into making it as easy as Amazon to get it up there. And they did a fantastic job, as we've all seen. And so what VMware has really done is step up everything about their deployment to make this, public cloud class in terms of ease of use. And the fact that we're not sitting here worrying about why is VMware so hard to use, that shows that they've actually succeeded.
Yeah, that's a great point. It looks like we're not doing anything in VMware because VMware did all the hard stuff for us already.
Exactly. Make no mistake, it is complicated on the VMware side. It's just all been done for us already. So hopefully all that answers your question, Keith.
No, that's exactly the kind of stuff, that I'm looking for. So if you're coming from a VMware background, which so much of the enterprise does, it makes perfect sense. If you're a Hyper-V based shop, then obviously the answer is going to be different. But but for this, it's as we've come to that distinction that it was relatively pain-free to do what we've done here, and the time it would have taken 10 years ago to do something comparable, we can't even really calculate right now.
All right, so in the time that we were chatting here, I finished configuring the load balancer. I added the 4 IPs of our 4 nodes to the load balancer and added a security group that let us hit the load balancer from the internet. So here I am hitting the DNS address of the load balancer. Whoops. And you see here we're hitting node number 4, and if I refresh, now we're on 2. Now we're on 1, and so we're getting bounced around. Looks to be round robin straight through the cluster. So
cool.
Pretty sweet. And so this is a Amazon native ELB load balancing instances, which are back in our VMware SDDC, and that is pretty cool. I'm pretty impressed with that. So that's all we got. Like I said, there's a little bit more to the eval guide, which is some really cool stuff. I wish we could show it. That is configuring a site-to-site VPN. I will show you guys quick where to do that, and then we'll go. So from within the VMware Cloud portal here, which is where we deployed the SDDC and everything. So we'll go into our SDDC, over to network, and to IPsec VPNs, either for workloads or for management. We can do VPN here, configure all of your settings on this side, and then you'll have to configure the same on your firewall at your on-prem site. But basically, you put the stuff in there, and then you go to Firewall Rule Accelerator, and once your VPN is created, you can use this accelerator to basically it's templates, and so it'll pull in the information from the VPN you created and add all the firewall rules that's necessary, so the ports, the protocol, and the remote network and everything, and create the rules for you. So basically it just makes it faster and easier to set up the proper firewall rules to make this VPN work. So if we were to do that, the VPN would be set up, and then we would be able to demonstrate hybrid linked mode, which you should go look up and watch some demos of. That's pretty cool. We could connect it back to AD on-prem That's cool. We could cold vMotion VMs from on-site up into our VMware SDDC here. So those are the things that we would be demoing if we were connected up to on-site. If we ever figure it out, maybe we'll tack that onto the end here. But anyway, that's it. Any parting thoughts, guys, before we go, just of the overall experience? What did you think? What questions do you have? Anything like that? David, we'll start with you.
Like I said earlier, I'm impressed with what they're doing with VMware Cloud on AWS. This has really helped me to better understand the different use cases for it, instead of just, my original thought, which was just, hey, running vSphere in AWS. No, there's a lot more to it than that. And VMware has done a great job with the interface. And, I'm excited to see that they have a hands-on lab on VMC, so that I can get some more practice on it without having to pay for it. And hopefully there'll be some bigger, announcements perhaps around it at VMworld. I know nothing, but I hope that there will be some more cool stuff.
Cool. Trevor, thoughts?
I am muted. I have no thoughts. It has all been discussed.
Excellent. Keith?
The eval guide is really, really good. Don't ignore it. You'll save yourself a lot of time if you actually trust it.
Are you saying that I should have put in the subnets it told me to instead of doing my own thing?
I'm saying you should be congratulated for trying to do this while hosting this entire session and discussion, and I'm very impressed. But the guide is
the demo gods.
Right. The guide is your friend here, and and it's really useful. And you can't say that about all guides that are out there.
That is true. I would agree with you.
The Gorilla guides.
Having been the Gorilla guides are good.
Those are the exceptions. Yeah.
Having been the one that went through it, I will agree with you. The guide was good. And my conclusion after this experience is I have a better understanding of how the locality, putting my workloads next to other AWS native workloads that are not EC2 instances can benefit me, like this ELB example, for instance. And so I have a better grasp on how enterprises would use this in the real world. So I really appreciate you all taking the time to join me. Keith, David, I know it's late on the East Coast, so especially appreciate you staying late to do it. And thanks for your time. I will see two of you at VMworld. And Trevor, I hope to see you rolling around on a little cart again at VMworld this year.
Robots to the world.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.